Welcome to Bellingham Voices. My name is Marie Marchand. I'm your host. And on today's show, we are happy to welcome a member of Lummi Nation, Darrell Hillaire. Darrell has been a presence of transformation in our community for decades. Welcome to the show.
Hi.
So you have many different exciting projects going on right now. Many are of an artistic and cultural nature. So my hope is we'll get to touch on each of those. But first I wanted to invite you to talk a little bit about your background.
My history? Yeah, I was born here in Bellingham in 1954, a member of a family where there's 14 children, mother and father, Henry and Violet Hillaire, both born on the Lummi Reservation. And we lived on the reservation for all of my younger years. And then at the age of 13, during that time, my mother owned land on Portage Island. And that land got sold to the county because they wanted to make a park there. And my mom took that money and bought a house in Bellingham. So overnight we had running water, and overnight we got to go to the bathroom inside, and we could actually walk to the store, all these things that I guess were viewed as modern, we got to experience. So then we went to Bellingham schools, and from that time, and after that, just got involved with a lot of different things, working construction, fishing, trying to do my own thing, and got married and raised 2 children. And then later in life, as my mother and father retired from public life, I ran for office and got elected to the Lummi Business Council and served for 12 years. And then got off for a period of time, and then just recently, 5 years ago, I went back and served another 3 years, so 15 years total. And feel really good about my time serving my people.
What would you describe as your most proud accomplishment on the council?
Well, I think, pride isn't necessarily like putting up monuments, or pride isn't necessarily, making a lot of money. I think pride comes from taking on the toughest issues and not giving up. And when I was there the first time, in our community, like this community and a lot of communities in America, there's a drug epidemic. There's a substance abuse epidemic that's in our community, that's ruining our families. There was a time there where we were meeting, and we had a string of overdoses in our community. And as the chairman, we just I decided that we're going to put everything else aside and we're going to face it. And so we did, and we formed an initiative, and it became the top priority of the council and the administration and the community, even those that resisted this whole idea of cracking down on drug dealers, spending more money on treatment, putting more money in prevention, trying to educate ourselves in what it is, and bringing up our history. Because when communities bring up their history, there's things that are in the closet that are kind of like not talked about. So we started to have that conversation. We talked about it. So I'm pretty proud of that in terms of being able to lead that conversation, lead those efforts, and really just work our way to forgiveness.
What are your highest personal values?
I think those kind of raise their head to you, those values, like who am I? That comes when you're in a room or you're in a conversation with an individual and you really don't want to do it, but then you make yourself do it, and you learn how to empathize, and you learn more about yourself. I value that. And then from my mother and my father, I value compassion. There's always somebody that needs a hand up. that needs a ride, that carries a certain amount of hardship, and taking the time to give them a hand is something is really important to me. You know. Then the third thing I think is I'm just pretty proud of the idea of not giving up and sticking with what I'm doing or other people are doing, you know, and actually knowing perhaps that I'm going to fail or they're going to fail, but we're still going to do it because we got to learn something here about ourselves and about how to make something better.
That's a good segue to my next question, which is about the Lummi Youth Academy. And it's something you're very passionate about. And I just have a short story about that because I've been there a few times. And once we were in your office having a meeting, and just kind of randomly and suddenly a student walked in and wrote on the board, "I love you, Darrell." Do you remember that?
Yeah, yeah.
And that was so beautiful and touching. And I think it's indicative of the love that is there and the care. So tell us a little bit about how you were involved in the formation of the Academy.
Well, as the chairman of the nation, and as we had this initiative against the drug epidemic going, it was a full-out hustle. So I was running out of the council chambers over to my office, and my aunt stopped me. She said, "Hey, Darrell, you need to build a dorm." I said, "Okay, Auntie." And then she explained to me why, you know, our kids need to have life skills, our kids need to have something to eat, our kids need to learn how to get to school every day. So I got interested in that, and I went to some of those child protective team meetings, and was floored. I was angry. One of those buckle your knee moments, you know, when you started to hear about how our kids are not being cared for. So when you know that, then, well, you got to ask yourself, am I going to do something? And so that was the thought. And then these things happen for a reason, right? And then might have been a few days, maybe a week later, I got this phone call from Harvard. And a friend of mine over there works there. He said, "Hey, Darrell, these people want to meet some Indians." I said, "Sure, send them out." And they came out from New York City, and they were down at the Chrysalis, and I went down there and greeted them and got on their charter bus and brought them out to Lummi. And there was a big Jewish family. It was like 40 of them. And they were all on this bus. And I was talking to them. I took them to the Stomach grounds, canoe ride. I took them to the smokehouse. Took them to Aunt Fran's house where she was making baskets and hats. And they got this whole experience, you know. I said, "Oh, wow, this is really great, you know. What can we do to help?" I said, "Well, I'm thinking about, you know, building a dorm for kids." I said, "Oh, well, we'll give you some money." So they gave me $40,000. So then, you know, so you have these things happening, and then, you know, you're putting your shoes on, you're getting dressed to go to work, you turn the TV on, you're watching TV. And it was Oprah, and she was talking to these people about innovations in education. And, you know, it was about charter schools way back when, you know, and how some people are building dormitories in the inner city where kids can go live there during the week and go to school and then go home on weekends. So I got the names of them all, and with that money, then I just kind of traveled around the country and looked at them. They're really good friends today. The Seed Academy in Washington, D.C. The people that gave me the money, they're the Cummings Foundation. It's a Jewish family, heirs to the Sara Lee Corporation. Yeah, so they became good friends, still talk to them, and the Seed Academy, the KIPP Academy, Andre Agassi, all those guys. So yeah, I just kind of picked and choose those things we thought would work at Lummi, you know. The whole time talking ourselves into doing it, you know, the people that were with me. So we did, and at the same time I was kind of like stalking the Gates Foundation, you know, wherever they were I'd go, you know, and didn't have anything, but I'd just give them my card, you know, give them something to remember me by. And then finally they called me and said, you know, "Tell me about the Academy." So I you're supposed to have those 3-minute elevator speeches, right? And I think mine was like going on 10. Then she said, "Oh, why don't you just shut up? I'm going to give you some money." So that started it. You know, they gave us $500,000, and that just things took off from there.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Tell us about maybe one or two of the kids whose lives were transformed by going through the academy.
I'll talk about Spotted Bear. Spotted Bear, he's actually from Montana. He's Blackfoot. But his family ended up in the Lummi community, and he was kind of grew up at Lummi, you know. And he came to the academy when he was a freshman. And for that first year, he didn't say anything, nothing. Just twiddled his thumb, you know, and agreed when he knew he had to do something, or you ask him a question, he'd shake his head yes or no. And after the second year, he asked me, you know, what he could do to get ready for football, because he liked to play football. I told him, "Oh, you got to run everywhere you go. Run everywhere you go. As soon as you get your practice gear on, you run everywhere you go. And then when you do that until practice is over, then you run to the locker room, and that's it." And I'll be danged if he didn't do that. He became All-State 2 years in a row, you know. And the thing about it, though, is that pretty soon he was just kind of following me everywhere I went. Like we went to New York to help with the firemen when they had a ceremony for the deceased firemen, their families, you know. The academy went there and helped, you know, and had ceremony with them. So, you know, you're just driving along, and then finally one day he said, "You know, you're the dad I never had." Oh. And today he's got a little baby boy, and his family's in San Diego because he's in the Marine Corps now, and doing everything right. Yeah, yeah, it's pretty cool.
Very cool. Thanks for sharing that story. I wanted to move on to a larger political scene with the Standing Rock movement, and that's brought to light Native activism and climate change, and also the umbrella issue of Indigenous rights in general. It's become an international movement, really. What are your thoughts on the Standing Rock movement?
Well, when I think of Standing Rock, I think of Arab Spring. I think of what is the equalizer here, you know? Media's changed, you know, communications changed. And the people that are in the middle of Standing Rock, they recognize that, and they brought the world to Standing Rock, and got people that normally wouldn't get off their couch to get off their couch and go out there to help and support. You know, the spirit of what they're trying to do is to stand up for their rights. You know, and those rights are protected in part by treaty, but then also there's this inherent right to exist, you know, based upon who they are and where they come from, and that's being brought out. So there's a strength in all of that, but that movement needs to continue, because I think that all supports what we're trying to do in terms of change our values as it relates to climate change. We've got to be able to figure that out, you know, to not develop for development's sake, to not, you know, continue to accumulate for accumulation's sake. That there's some kind of shift that we got to recognize as a people, all of us, you know. You know, we got Indigenous rights in the front of that, but at some point it's got to transform itself where we're all one, and we're all standing with what those ideals are to save ourselves, really, because I think Mother Earth's going to take care of herself just fine, and it's not very forgiving at times, you know.
Let's move on to a little bit about your artistic endeavors. So we'd like to hear about your book, and then you have an art exhibit and a theater group. So maybe you could talk a little bit about those things.
Well, we're doing a book, and it's called Jacental, and it means to learn and grow together. And the teaching behind Jacental and learning and growing together is that we create harmony. And that's probably something we kind of need right now. And so what it came from the idea that the National Geographic reporters did a book called Wisdom Keepers, beautiful book. It's got all these native elders from across the country pictures and narrative, including Oren Lyons from the Six Nations Iroquois, who's very close to Lummi, good friends, a respected elder that I follow, and a lot of our people that protect our sovereignty follow. His words are really important to us. So he's like in the middle of it. But I noticed that they did not have Coast Salish elders or spiritual leaders in there. So I said, well, I guess we better do one. And so we started the work on it, and we've interviewed 8 elders now from different parts of our Coast Salish territory, from as far north as Vancouver, Squamish, as far south as Muckleshoot, and over to Sklallam and Lummi, and Cowichan over on the island. We're going to continue that and try to create some balance between male, female, as well as the different points of our homeland. And decided to ask if we could perhaps get it published. And just yesterday, UW Press said they're very interested, and we're going to go down to meet them on January 3rd, and then a follow-up meeting to talk about the details of a contract.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah.
That's huge news.
Yeah, it feels good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Great. And is the art exhibit related to the book?
The art exhibit is an example of what the book's going to look like. Mm-hmm. Yeah, with both the photos and the narratives that describe the people that saw how the book's going to be presented.
Mm-hmm. Are members of the public welcome to that exhibit, or is it a private exhibit?
It's public. Mike Motel down there at the chiropractor's office on 1406 or 1409, it must be 1409 Cornwall, his office. He's got a beautiful little office there, and he is part of the Bellingham Downtown Art Walk every first Friday of the month. And we asked him, and he let us in, and we're going to leave the pictures up for a couple more weeks.
And what is the Children of the Setting Sun?
In the early 1900s, native spiritual practices were outlawed in this country, and we couldn't practice that. Our connection to what is known as God, it was banned, and there, we were to become Christians. So you think about that, then you think about my great-grandfather, Frank Hillaire, who in 1930 formed a dance group called Children of the Setting Sun. So there he was in broad daylight in full public, singing our songs and dancing our dances and wearing his full costume, and he brought with him his grandkids who, are my father and my uncles, and they were all their little kids out there performing for the public. So he did that, and then, prior to dying, he gathered up his grandkids and said, keep my fires burning. So they did, he passed away, then my Uncle Joe Hillaire, he continued the dance group, and it was the next generation. This is like my Uncle Smitty, James Hillaire, and the elders that age, Jack Kagi, they stepped in and they performed. And then Uncle Joe passed away, and then there was like 5 or 6 versions of the Children of the Setting Sun. Uncle Smitty and Sam Kagi, Joe Washington, Pauline Hillaire. They all had their versions of Setting Sun. So then they all stopped, and then, my cousins and I got a canoe club together, and we called it the Setting Sun. Then we raced and raced and raced until we got tired. And then we put that away. And just recently, the last 5 or 6 years, I got interested in telling our story. And so I produced a play called What About Those Promises?, which tells the story of treaty signing and those things that happened and did not happen after the Treaty of 1855 was signed and we moved to the Lummi Reservation. And so doing that and the interest I got with that, I had to get organized, so I organized Setting Sun Productions. And took that further with making a couple of movies and doing an audiobook. Decided to register as a 501c3, so now it's Children of the Setting Sun Productions 501c3. So now we're doing the book.
That's wonderful.
It's fun.
That's great.
Yeah.
You've got so much going on. I said right now in your life you're doing more than I've done in my whole life. It's pretty amazing.
Well, you know, I like to include the children everything I do. You kind of bring them along, and they can observe, or they can participate, or they can try to make money off of concessions or something, you know, and they learn just by observing, really, that energy, you know.
That's beautiful. I wanted to ask your opinion about the Bellingham Bay Waterfront, and in particular, when it comes to design, what are some elements of maybe Lummi tradition that could be incorporated? Do you have any ideas on that?
Well, first, you know, it should be cleaned up. You know, we, as a nation, I'm not here as a Lummi rep, but I know, you know, our council and our fishermen and our natural resource people all want it to be cleaned up to the optimal level. So that's primary. And then second is to monitor, gauge, and track harvest. And our harvest of salmon and shellfish should be tracking in such a way that it's sustainable. You know, so if we can all agree on that and understand that that's where Lummi's at, it's some people call it our backyard, but that's, you know, that's right connected to our reservation, you know, and our fishermen are right there, and they want to ensure that the food's always going to be there. So if that's agreed upon and that's integrated into the planning, I think, you know, there's a place to start. And then just really enjoying talking about what was once there before, and that our history's connected to all points within Bellingham Bay. And then maybe we can bring some of that back to life. And thinking within the context of, you know, village. In the old days, you know, they thought, oh, we'll give the Lummies a totem pole and they'll be happy, you know, but that's never true, you know. It's really about how we lived and how we functioned, you know. And it's all, if you look within the context of the village, there were a lot of things going on within the village, and then what of those things can we bring back to life that are, you know, real practical in nature, that both the citizens of Bellingham and the members of the Lummi Nation can do together, enjoy together.
How would you describe the relations between Lummi Nation and the non-native communities in Whatcom County at this point in time?
I think relations, if they have history to them, a shared history, a willingness to understand history, we have a pretty good relationship, whether it be a working relationship or just, you know, being good neighbors, you know. When there's this lack of understanding of history and not wanting to know history, then things get difficult. Then in some instances it deteriorates into race and or some kind of superiority complex, you know. But if we understand history together, I think we have a really good chance of, you know, being good partners.
The city is hosting the Martin Luther King Jr. event on January 16th at noon at City Hall. I'll give a little plug for that. And you're going to be doing the opening prayer. So I wanted to ask you how you feel about Martin Luther King Jr. in relation to his work and his life. And I can see parallels between you and Martin Luther King Jr. from our conversation today with your leadership and your involvement, especially with the young people in transformation. So how do you feel about Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy?
his quote, you know, there's quotes that stick with you, right? And it's actually not his quote. It's actually came from Gandhi, and then maybe Gandhi got it from some other ancient teacher. But that whole idea of hatred never puts an end to hatred. It's stuck with me ever since I heard that from one of those gatherings down at City Hall, and somebody said, "This is what Martin Luther King Jr. said: hatred never puts an end to hatred. Only love can." And you take some things and you just make it part of who you are, you know, and that's one of them. That's what he means to me.
Thank you. We're looking forward to having you there. The last question is something that I ask everybody, and usually people say hiking or biking. You're welcome to say anything you want, but what's your favorite thing to do in Bellingham?
Well, I think there's two things. There's this beautiful place called Lummi, and if you go out to Lummi Shore Road, you know, and you can park anywhere along Lummi Shore Road and look back at Bellingham. So there's Bellingham, the water, and the hills, and Mount Baker, you know, and it's pretty beautiful. I really like that, you know, and I remember having my uncle Arthur Lane tell me at one time he was sitting on a log with his grandmother, and this is back like in the 30s again. And there was Bellingham and Mount Baker. It was so beautiful. It was getting dark, and the full moon came up. She says, "You know, honey, someday there's going to be somebody walking on that moon." And that always stuck with me, you know, that she knew, you know, that progress was coming, and things were changing so fast, even back in 1930. Yeah, so I like that, and I like anywhere along the shoreline in Bellingham. If we can make sure we have a lot of access and we redevelop at Bellingham Bay, that'd be good.
Well, I want to thank you for being on the show today. I've really enjoyed our conversation and hearing your history and your projects that are going on, so thank you.
You're welcome. It was fun.
And thanks for joining us for Bellingham Voices. We'll see you next time. Take care.
Good.